Mariana never imagined that her 21st birthday would end with the one man she should have feared more than anyone else on earth. Alejandro Sandoval, 40 years old, head of the Venezuelan Mafia, a man whose arms were covered in tattoos and whose eyes were made of steel, was her best friend's father. And that night, everything changed. Caracas smelled of rain and danger. The December sky hung heavy over the capital, thick with clouds that promised another storm. Mariana stood on the penthouse balcony in the Altamira district, a glass of red wine trembling slightly in her hand. Her long brown hair moved in the wind, and her black dress clung to every curve of her body, drawing the eyes of every man in the room. But Mariana only had eyes for one man. Across the room, Alejandro stood surrounded by men in dark suits, men who spoke to him in low voices, careful voices, the kind of respect that bordered on fear. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and the tattoos on his forearms told a story. Crosses, roses, Spanish words inked into skin that had seen violence and power in equal measure. His dark hair was combed back, his jaw shadowed with 3 days of stubble. He looked like a predator. He was 40 years old. He was the father of Sofia, Mariana's best friend since childhood. And Mariana had wanted him for months, with a desperation that bordered on madness. "Don't look at him like that," Sofia whispered, appearing at Mariana's side with a bottle of champagne. She was 21 too, the same age as Mariana, but there was an innocence in her eyes that Mariana had lost long ago. "People are going to notice." Mariana looked away, her cheeks burning. Sofia had no idea. Nobody did. For 6 months now, ever since Mariana had started spending more time at the Sandoval house, something had been growing between her and Alejandro. Glances that lasted 1 second too long, hands that brushed during dinner by accident, his voice dropping low and rough whenever he spoke to her. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mariana lied, taking a sip of wine. The alcohol burned her throat, but she needed something to calm the fluttering in her chest. Sofia laughed, looping an arm around her friend's shoulders. It's fine. Come on, Dad's about to give a toast in your honor. Not every day his second daughter turns 21. Second daughter. Those words always hurt Mariana in a strange way. She didn't want to be his daughter. Not to him. They walked into the main room, where guests were already gathering around the long marble table loaded with food and liquor. Through the windows, Caracas glittered, a city of contrasts, where luxury sat beside poverty and beauty beside brutality. Alejandro raised his glass, and the room fell silent instantly. "Mariana." His voice was deep, commanding, filling the room like thunder. "I've known you since you were a little girl. I've watched you grow into a strong, beautiful woman." His eyes found hers, and Mariana felt the air leave the room entirely. "Today you turn 21. You're an adult now, and I wish you everything you're reaching for in life, even if what you're reaching for is dangerous." He said the last words slowly, looking directly into her eyes. The room erupted in applause, glasses lifting, laughter spilling. Mariana couldn't move. Her heart was slamming so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Sofia squeezed her hand. "See? Dad adores you. He always says you're like his second daughter." Mariana forced herself to smile, while something inside her quietly broke. The hours rolled on. Guests drank, danced, laughed. Salsa and reggaeton thundered from the speakers, and the dance floor spun with people who, for one night, seemed to forget the crisis crushing the country outside. But here, in Alejandro Sandoval's world, drugs, weapons, illegal casinos, the money never ran out. His empire bought a life of luxury that most Venezuelans could only dream of. Mariana sat on a sofa, watching the room. Sofia had disappeared somewhere with one of her boyfriends, and Mariana was alone. She looked up and saw Alejandro by the bar, talking to 2 men. One of them, heavy-set in a gray suit, was talking animatedly, but Alejandro looked bored. Then his eyes found Mariana, and this time he didn't look away. He set down his glass and walked toward her. Every step was measured, full of the confidence of a man who had never had to ask twice for what he wanted. People stepped out of his way without even realizing they were doing it. Mariana felt her breathing quicken. Her palms started to sweat. Alejandro stopped in front of her, eyes locked on hers, and held out his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. It was an order. Mariana glanced around. No one seemed to be watching. She took his hand, rough, scarred, and let him pull her to her feet. He led her to the dance floor, where several couples already swayed to a slow, sensual bachata. Alejandro's arms circled her waist, pulling her closer. His body was hard as steel, and the scent of him, sandalwood and tobacco, was intoxicating. Mariana rested her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. They danced, and with every second the space between them shrank. "You know this is wrong," Alejandro murmured, his mouth so close to her ear she felt the heat of his breath against her skin. "What's wrong?" Mariana asked, though she already knew the answer. "The way I look at you. What I think about at night." Mariana's heart exploded. His words landed like a match thrown onto gasoline. "I think about you too," she admitted, her voice shaking. Alejandro's fingers tightened at her waist, drawing her in until their bodies were almost flush. "You're my daughter's friend," he said, but there was no conviction in it. Only a war, desire against duty. "And you're the man I want," Mariana answered, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I don't care what people say. I don't care about anything. Except you." For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The music dissolved around them. The world stopped existing. There were only the two of them, a man and a woman, bound by a wanting that had no right to exist. "Come outside in 5 minutes," Alejandro whispered. "Last door on the left, end of the hallway." He let her go and walked away, leaving Mariana trembling in the middle of the dance floor. The minutes crawled by like hours. Mariana stood at the bar, pretending to sip her drink, her hands shaking too hard to hold the glass steady. No one was watching her. No one knew that her life was about to tip over the edge of a cliff. 5 minutes passed. Mariana set down her glass and crossed the room, trying not to draw attention, weaving past a knot of men arguing business, until she found herself in a long hallway. The lights were dim, expensive paintings lining the walls, stolen art, or art bought on the black market. Last door on the left. Mariana's heart pounded so hard she could feel her pulse in her temples. She put her hand on the handle and pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the city glow spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows. Alejandro stood at the window, looking out over Caracas. He didn't turn when she entered. Mariana shut the door behind her and locked it. "If you come any closer," Alejandro said, still not facing her, "there's no going back. I'll change you. I'll ruin you for every other man." Mariana walked toward him slowly, her heels clicking against the wood floor. "I'm already ruined," she whispered. "You ruined me months ago, the first time you looked at me like a woman and not a child." Alejandro turned in the dim light. His face looked carved from marble, perfect, brutal, beautiful. His eyes, dark as the Caracas night, held hers with an intensity that made her knees weaken. "You're 21, he said. "I'm 40. I'm your best friend's father. I'm the head of a cartel. The people I know are dangerous. My life is dangerous." "I don't care," Mariana interrupted, stepping until she stood right in front of him. She had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "I want you. Now." For a moment, Alejandro seemed to be fighting himself, and then something in him gave way. He closed the door behind them, and everything that had been building between them for months finally broke loose. There was no more hallway, no more party, no more world outside that room. Only the two of them, and the decision they had already made long before either of them said a word. When dawn painted the sky over Caracas in pink and gold, Mariana lay in his arms. Something had shifted between them forever, something that could never be undone. And looking at him in the half-light, she found she didn't regret a single second of it. "You're in my life now," Alejandro said quietly, his voice rough with something Mariana had never heard from him before. "And I'm not letting you go." Mariana smiled, tracing her fingers along his jaw. "I don't want to go anywhere." Neither of them knew yet that this was only the beginning, that their forbidden love would carry them into places neither could imagine, that Alejandro's world of violence, betrayal, and danger would soon threaten to consume them both. But that night, in the darkness above Caracas, there was only the two of them, 21 and 40, a woman and a man, a love that shouldn't exist, burning brighter than anything either of them had ever known. And outside, Caracas slept on, unaware that in one of its luxury penthouses, a story had just begun, one that would change everything. 3 weeks passed, and Mariana could still feel Alejandro's touch on her skin like a brand. Caracas had slid into the rainy season, and the heavy clouds over the city seemed to mirror the unease building in her chest. They met in secret, safe apartments, hotels on the edge of the city, places where no one would recognize them. Every meeting was more intense than the last, every touch more desperate. But Mariana knew they couldn't hide forever. That afternoon she sat in a cafe in Chao, staring at her phone. Sophia had sent 3 messages asking why Mariana had been acting so distant lately, why she kept avoiding their usual outings. Mariana didn't know how to answer. How could she look her best friend in the eye, knowing she was sleeping with her father? Her phone buzzed. A message from Alejandro. "I need you now. Sending a car." Mariana's heart lurched. Alejandro never contacted her in the middle of the day unless it was urgent. Something had happened. 15 minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside the cafe. Mariana climbed into the back seat, where Miguel, one of Alejandro's most trusted men, was waiting. Miguel was 35, short but powerfully built, with a scar cutting across his left eye. He rarely smiled. "The boss is waiting," Miguel said, and the car pulled into the dense Caracas traffic. "What happened?" Mariana asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. Miguel met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Trouble. Big trouble." He said nothing more, and Mariana knew better than to push. In Alejandro's world, information was currency, and trust was earned over years, not days. They drove through the city, past colorful residential blocks, weaving through streets clogged with motorcycles and buses. Venezuela was living through hard times, inflation spiraling out of control, people lining up for bread and medicine. But inside Alejandro's SUV, Mariana was insulated from all of it, wrapped in a bubble of wealth and power. They arrived at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a massive concrete building ringed by a tall barbed wire fence. 2 men with automatic rifles opened the gate as the SUV approached. Miguel parked near the entrance, and Mariana stepped out, her legs unsteady beneath her. Inside, the warehouse was cold and dark, packed with crates, pallets, trucks. Near the back, Mariana saw a group of about 10 men circled around someone kneeling on the floor. Alejandro stood at the center, arms crossed over his chest, his face carved from stone. When he heard Mariana's footsteps, he turned. For one moment his mask slipped, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes, and something else. Fear. Then the mask came back. "Come here," he said, holding out his hand. Mariana crossed to him, and Alejandro wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. His body was strung tight as a coiled spring. "What's going on?" she whispered. Alejandro nodded toward the man kneeling on the floor. His hands were bound behind his back, his face bruised and bloodied. He looked to be around 30, dressed in torn jeans and a t-shirt. "This man worked for me," Alejandro said, his voice flat, cold. "For 3 years. I trusted him, and he sold information to Carlos Mendoza." Mariana went still. Carlos Mendoza. Even she, an outsider to this world, knew that name. Alejandro's rival, head of a competing cartel, brutal, merciless. The war between Sandoval and Mendoza had raged for years, leaving bodies and burned businesses in its wake. What will you do to him?" Mariana asked, though she already knew. Alejandro studied her face. "You have to understand something about my world, Mariana. Betrayal isn't forgiven. It can't be, because the moment you forgive one man, 10 others will think they can betray you and survive." The man on the floor lifted his head, one eye swollen, almost shut. "Please, boss," he rasped. "I have family. Kids. Mendoza threatened to kill them if I didn't work for him. You think I don't have family?" Alejandro's voice cracked with sudden fury. He released Mariana and crouched in front of the man. "You think your betrayal didn't put my daughter at risk? My people I love." His eyes flicked to Mariana for a fraction of a second, then back to the traitor. "I gave you a chance at a life, at dignity. And you chose Mendoza." Alejandro stood, drawing a pistol from his waistband. The men around them stepped back, clearing space. Mariana wanted to look away. She couldn't. She stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alejandro pressed the barrel to the man's head. The man began to sob, his whole body shaking. "Alejandro," Mariana whispered, not knowing if she meant to stop him or simply needed him to know she was there. Alejandro pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. The man's body crumpled sideways, blood spreading across the concrete. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Alejandro turned to his men. Clean this up. Find everyone who worked with him. Everyone. The men scattered immediately, calling for trucks and bags. Alejandro holstered his weapon and came back to Mariana. His face was calm, as if he hadn't just taken a man's life. Come, he said, taking her hand. We need to talk. He led her to a small office at the back of the warehouse. A bare room with a metal desk, a few chairs, a filing cabinet. Alejandro shut the door and leaned against the desk, watching her. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said quietly. But you needed to. You needed to understand who I am. What I do. Mariana stood frozen, still processing what she'd witnessed. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. He begged for his life. Every man I've ever killed has begged for his life, Alejandro answered. But that doesn't change what they did. That man sold information that could have gotten my daughter killed. My family. You. That last word hung in the air between them. Me, Mariana repeated. Alejandro crossed to her, his large hands framing her face. Mendoza knows about you, he said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard from him before. Fear. The traitor told him you're important to me. Which makes you a target now. Mariana's whole world stopped. What? How could he know? We weren't careful enough, Alejandro said bitterly. Mendoza has people everywhere. They were watching me. They saw us together. Panic began spreading through Mariana's chest. What does that mean? What will he do? Alejandro brushed his thumb across her cheek, his touch unexpectedly gentle. He'll try to use you against me. Take you. Hurt you. That's how he operates. He attacks what you love to break you. So what do we do? Mariana's voice was barely a whisper. I have to protect you, Alejandro said. I'm moving you to one of my safe houses. Miguel and 2 others will be with you around the clock. You don't go anywhere without protection. Understood. Mariana shook her head, tears rising. And Sofia, my family. I can't just disappear. Sofia isn't in danger as long as Mendoza doesn't know she's my daughter, Alejandro said. And your family isn't either. You're the target because of what I feel for you. His eyes held hers, and in that look was everything they couldn't say out loud. A love that was forbidden, a wanting that could destroy them both. I don't want to lose you, Alejandro whispered, his forehead against hers. Not now, when I've finally found something real in this godforsaken world. Mariana lifted her hands to frame his face. You won't lose me. I promise. Alejandro kissed her, desperate, urgent, like it might be the last time. But the moment broke apart at the sound of fists pounding on the door. Boss, Miguel's voice, edged with urgency. We've got a problem. Alejandro pulled back, instantly alert. What is it? Mendoza's people? They're here, surrounding the warehouse. Everything happened fast after that. Alejandro drew his weapon, checking the clip. How many? At least 20. Maybe more. 4 cars. Alejandro cursed under his breath and looked at Mariana. Listen to me carefully. You go with Miguel to the evacuation tunnel at the back of the building. He'll get you out. Understand? And you? Mariana asked, panic closing around her throat. I'm going to fight, Alejandro said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Now go. Before Mariana could move, the warehouse windows exploded in a shower of glass. Gunfire cracked like thunder, bullets tearing into concrete and steel. Men shouted. Explosions rocked the building. Chaos took hold in seconds. Alejandro shoved Mariana to the floor, shielding her with his body. The office door burst open. Miguel, pistol already in hand. We have to move. Now. Alejandro pulled Mariana up and they ran into the narrow hallway behind the office, gunfire still echoing behind them as Alejandro's men returned fire, defending the warehouse. Miguel led them toward the building's old basements. Alejandro stayed close behind Mariana, one hand on her back, the other holding his weapon ready. They reached a metal door. Miguel pulled it open, revealing a long, dark tunnel dug beneath the building. An escape route built for exactly this kind of night. Go, Alejandro told Mariana, pushing her gently toward the tunnel. Miguel will get you out. There's a car waiting on the other side. No, Mariana said, gripping his hand. I'm going with you. Mariana. His voice was sharp, edged with the same authority he used when giving orders. I don't have time to argue. Go. Now. Another explosion tore through the building, closer than the last. Part of the warehouse roof caved in. The shouting grew louder. "They've got grenades," Miguel said, his face going pale. "We need to move. All of us." Alejandro hesitated for a second, glancing back toward the warehouse where his men were still fighting. Then he looked at Mariana, and something in his eyes shifted. He'd made his decision. "Fine. Let's go." They entered the tunnel, Miguel first with a flashlight, Mariana in the middle, Alejandro behind, still watching their backs for pursuit. The tunnel was narrow, damp, thick with the smell of mildew. Their footsteps echoed off the walls. Mariana could hear her own breath coming fast and shallow. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it might give out. Behind them, the gunfire and shouting still carried, faint now, distant. "How much farther?" Alejandro asked. 100 meters, Miguel answered. "Maybe less." They ran through the dark, and Mariana could feel Alejandro right behind her, his hand at her back, the only thing keeping her from total panic. Finally, light. The end of the tunnel. Miguel emerged first, weapon raised, scanning the area. "Clear," he said. Mariana and Alejandro stepped out into a small courtyard behind the warehouse, walled in on all sides. An old, unremarkable sedan sat parked in the corner. Miguel pulled the doors open. "Get in, I'll drive." He didn't finish. A gunshot tore through the air and Miguel dropped, clutching his shoulder, blood already seeping between his fingers. Alejandro spun, weapon already raised. 3 men stepped out of the shadows on the far side of the courtyard, Mendoza's men, guns drawn. "Sandoval," one of them shouted, grinning wide, gold teeth flashing, a long scar running down his neck. "Mendoza sends his regards. And orders you to die." Alejandro didn't answer. He fired. The first man dropped, the bullet catching him square in the chest. The other 2 scattered for cover. Alejandro grabbed Mariana and pulled her behind the car, using it as a shield. "Stay here," he growled. But Mariana couldn't stay. She saw Miguel still lying on the ground, bleeding. Without thinking, she ran, grabbing him under the arms and dragging him toward the car. "What are you doing?" Alejandro shouted, but he couldn't stop her. He was too busy exchanging fire with the remaining attackers. Mariana hauled Miguel's weight, her muscles screaming with the effort. Bullets whistled past her head, kicking up concrete around her feet. One shot passed so close she felt the air move against her skin. She finally reached the car, pulling Miguel behind the rear bumper. He groaned in pain, but he was alive, breathing. Alejandro fired again, and the second attacker fell. Only one man remained, the one with the gold teeth, who tried to run. Alejandro was faster. One final shot, and the man crumpled to the ground. Silence. Alejandro turned to Mariana, eyes blazing. "I told you to stay put. You could have died." "He would have died," Mariana shot back, pointing at Miguel. Alejandro opened his mouth to answer, but in the distance, police sirens began to wail. Caracas was reacting to the battle that had just torn through its outskirts. "We don't have time," Miguel said, pressing a hand to his wound. "We need to move. Now." Alejandro helped Mariana into the back seat and got behind the wheel. Miguel took the passenger side. The engine caught on the first try, and the sedan tore out of the courtyard into a narrow alley. For a few minutes they drove in silence, only the engine and their breathing filling the car. Mariana watched Caracas slide past the window, colorful houses, people on the streets, life going on, unaware of the battle that had just taken place. Alejandro glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Mariana nodded, though it was a lie. She wasn't okay. Something in her had broken tonight. She had seen death up close. She had watched Alejandro kill without hesitation, and she had risked her own life to save a man who wasn't hers to save. "You were brave," Miguel said, turning to look at her. His face was pale from blood loss, but he managed a weak smile. "Not many people would have done that." "I couldn't leave you," Mariana whispered. Alejandro said nothing, but his hands tightened on the wheel. They arrived at a small house on the edge of La Florida, one of Alejandro's safe houses, modest, unremarkable, invisible, perfect for hiding. Alejandro pulled into the garage and helped Miguel inside, where a doctor was already waiting, an old man with tired eyes who had patched up bullet wounds for Alejandro for years without ever asking questions. While the doctor worked on Miguel, Alejandro took Mariana upstairs to a small, clean bedroom, a simple bed, a wardrobe, a window looking out over a shaded garden. Alejandro shut the door and leaned against it, watching her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mariana started to cry. Alejandro was at her side in an instant, holding her tight, letting her cry into his chest, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring comfort in Spanish. "I'm sorry," Mariana sobbed. "I didn't want to be weak, but it was—" "Shoo," Alejandro said. "You're not weak. You're the bravest woman I know. You saved Miguel's life. Not many people would have done what you did tonight." "I thought we were going to die," Mariana said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I thought I was going to lose you." Alejandro pulled back gently, wiping the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "You won't lose me," he said firmly. "I promise you that. I won't let Mendoza touch you. I'll kill every man who tries." Mariana believed him. She saw the absolute certainty in his eyes. But she also knew that in his world, promises weren't always kept. "I love you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Alejandro went still. His eyes widened, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd just heard. "What did you say?" Mariana took a breath. "I love you, Alejandro. I know it's insane. I know I shouldn't. But I love you." For a moment, Alejandro looked like a man who had just been handed the greatest gift of his life and its greatest curse in the same breath. Then he leaned in and kissed her, slow, tender, the kind of kiss that made Mariana feel like the most precious thing in the world. "I love you too," he murmured against her lips. "God, I love you so much it hurts." They fell onto the bed together, and this time was different. There was no desperation, no ferocity, only warmth, tenderness, the quiet intimacy of two people finding comfort in each other in the middle of chaos. The night carried them somewhere gentler than fear, somewhere neither of them wanted to leave. Later, they lay tangled together, breathing slowing, hearts settling. Outside, Caracas glowed in the dark, a restless city that never truly slept. But in that small safe house, there was only the two of them. "What do we do now?" Mariana asked quietly. Alejandro kissed her forehead. "We fight together. Mendoza wants a war. He'll get one. But I will never let him take you." Mariana nodded, curling into his arms. She knew there was a long road ahead, a fight against enemies, against the past, maybe even against themselves. But that night, in the dark, they were together. And that was enough. 2 weeks in hiding changed Mariana in ways she never could have predicted. The safe house in La Florida became both her prison and her sanctuary. Alejandro came every night his work allowed, and their time together was intense, urgent, laced with the desperation of two people who knew their happiness could be shattered at any moment. Outside the walls, Caracas served notice that the war between Sandoval and Mendoza was only escalating. People died on both sides. Warehouses burned. Shipments were intercepted. Everyone in the city understood this was only the beginning. One rain-soaked afternoon, the wet season in Venezuela was merciless, streets turning to rivers, the air thick with humidity. Mariana stood at the living room window watching the rain slide down the glass when she heard a car pull up outside. Alejandro. Her heart, as always, quickened. The door opened and he walked in, soaked through, his black shirt clinging to every line of muscle, his hair slicked back. He looked like something risen from the sea. Behind him came Miguel, his arm now in a sling but looking far better than he had 2 weeks earlier, and someone else. A woman Mariana had never seen before. Around 35, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes like flint, dressed in a black leather jacket and jeans. At her waist, Mariana caught the outline of a gun. Her face looked forged by experience and pain. "Mariana," Alejandro said, peeling off his wet jacket. "This is Valentina. She's worked for me for 10 years. Best bodyguard I've got." Valentina nodded at Mariana, her gaze assessing but not unkind. "I heard about you," she said, her voice low and rough. "The girl who saved Miguel. You've got guts, I'll give you that." Mariana wasn't sure how to respond, so she just offered an uncertain smile. Alejandro crossed to her and kissed her hard, not caring that the others were watching. "I missed you," he murmured against her mouth. "You saw me yesterday," Mariana said, smiling anyway. "Too long." Miguel cleared his throat pointedly, and Alejandro pulled back, though he kept Mariana close beside him, an anchor. "We need to talk," he said, his tone turning serious. They gathered around the small wooden table in the dining room. Alejandro poured himself whiskey, the others took beer. Mariana felt the tension in the room. Something important was coming. "Mendoza's planning something big," Alejandro began, turning the glass in his hands. "My people intercepted one of his couriers yesterday. Before he died, he told us Mendoza's organizing a massive shipment. Cocaine, coming from Colombia. Worth $20 million. Miguel let out a low whistle. $20 million. That's his biggest run in years. "Exactly," Alejandro said. "And he's planning to use it to take control of the northern neighborhoods of Caracas." "My neighborhoods?" Valentina leaned forward. "When does the shipment arrive?" 3 days from now," Alejandro said. "The port at La Guaira. Midnight." Silence fell. Mariana looked between them, trying to piece together what all of this meant. Alejandro glanced at her, then back to the others. "I'm going to steal it," he said flatly. "If Mendoza loses 20 million, his empire starts to crumble. His people lose faith. And I finish him. That's a war," Miguel said quietly. "A real one. Not street shootouts. A massacre." "It's already a war," Alejandro answered, his voice cold. "Mendoza started it the moment he tried to kill Mariana. Now I'm going to end it." A chill ran down Mariana's spine. Alejandro was doing all of this for her. The war, the violence, all of it because Mendoza had threatened her life. "Alejandro," she said quietly, "you don't have to." "I do have to," he cut in, meeting her eyes directly. "He threatened you. That means I have to destroy him. This isn't up for negotiation." Valentina looked at Mariana with something close to respect. "You're lucky," she told her. "Not many men would go to war over a woman." "She's not just a woman," Alejandro said. "She's everything." The words hung in the air, and Mariana felt tears rise, but she held them back. This wasn't the moment for tears. This was the moment for strength. "What can I do?" she asked. Everyone looked at her in surprise. "What?" Alejandro repeated. "I'm asking what I can do to help," Mariana said firmly. "This is my war as much as it's yours. Mendoza wants me dead, so I want to fight." Miguel shook his head. "It's too dangerous. You're not trained." "Then train me," Mariana said, turning to Alejandro. "You have 3 days before the operation, right? Teach me to shoot. Teach me to defend myself. I don't want to be a victim. I want to be a fighter." Alejandro studied her for a long moment. Mariana could see the war in his eyes, the need to protect her fighting against a growing respect for her strength. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. Valentina, you start training her tomorrow." He pointed a finger at Mariana. "And you listen to every word she says. No arguments." "Understood." "Understood," Mariana said. The next morning, Mariana woke early. Alejandro was still asleep beside her, one arm draped over her waist. She watched him in the morning light, his face calm in sleep, so different from the hard mask he wore all day. The tattoos across his chest told stories of violence, but in this moment, he looked almost at peace. She kissed his forehead softly and slipped out of bed, trying not to wake him. Valentina was waiting for her in the garage, already changed into training gear, black leggings and a tank top that showed off her muscular arms. 2 pistols sat on the table beside her. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," Mariana said, though her stomach twisted with nerves. "Good. First lesson, the gun isn't your enemy. It's your friend. The faster you accept that, the better." The next 2 hours were exhausting. Valentina taught Mariana how to hold the weapon, how to aim, how to breathe as she fired. Then they moved down to the basement, where Alejandro kept a private shooting range. The gunfire was deafening, but Mariana didn't flinch. Again, Valentina said, watching the target, "Aim for center mass. Don't try to be precise. Just hit." Mariana fired. This time the shot landed closer to center. "Better," Valentina said with approval. "You've either got natural talent or you're just angry enough to want to kill something." Mariana gave a crooked smile. "Maybe a bit of both." They trained for days straight. Alejandro often came to watch, standing in the shadows, arms crossed. Mariana felt his eyes on her, and it drove her forward. She wanted him to be proud of her. She wanted to be strong, for him and for herself. On the 3rd day, Valentina declared Mariana ready. "You're not a professional," she said honestly, "but you know how to hold a weapon, you know how to defend yourself. Right now, that's all we need." That evening, as the sun sank over Caracas, painting the sky orange and violet, Alejandro gathered his best men in the living room. 10 of them, veterans, loyal to the last man. Miguel, Valentina, and 8 others with hard faces and steady eyes. Alejandro spread a map of the port across the table. The shipment comes in at midnight, dock 7, he said, pointing at the map. Mendoza will have at least 20 men there. We'll have 10, but we have the advantage of surprise. How do we get in? One of the men asked. By water, Alejandro said. 2 boats. We go in quiet, take out the guards, intercept the shipment. Fast, clean, no witnesses. And if Mendoza shows up himself? Valentina asked. Alejandro smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Even better. I end this once and for all. Mariana listened, her heart pounding. She wanted to go with them. She wanted to be part of this. But she knew Alejandro would never allow it. Then something unexpected happened. Mariana comes with us, Alejandro said. Everyone stared at him like he'd lost his mind. What? Miguel exclaimed. Alejandro, that's suicide. She's not ready. She's ready. Alejandro cut in. Valentina trained her. And we need her there. Why? Valentina asked, frowning. Alejandro looked at Mariana. Because if Mendoza shows up and sees her, he'll lose focus. He'll be furious that his target is standing right in front of him. And that gives us the edge. Mariana understood immediately. She was bait. But she didn't care. She wanted to be there. She wanted to fight. I agree, she said firmly. Alejandro nodded. Tomorrow, 11 at night. Everyone ready. Heavy weapons. This is going to be bloody. The room began to empty as people scattered to prepare. Alejandro stayed behind with Mariana. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. I could lose you tomorrow, he said quietly. That thought is killing me. Mariana stepped into his arms, holding him tight. You won't lose me. We're fighting together. And we'll win together. Alejandro kissed her, desperate and consuming. And that night, the last one before everything changed, they held on to each other with a hunger that had nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with the simple, desperate need to feel alive while they still could. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dark, whispering promises neither of them could be sure they'd keep. I love you, Alejandro said. If something happens tomorrow, you need to know that. I love you more than my own life. Nothing's going to happen, Mariana said firmly. Because we'll be together. And together, we're unbeatable. They lay in the dark, holding each other until sleep finally came, restless, full of dreams of blood and fire. The next day was the longest of Mariana's life. They prepared in silence, checked weapons, strapped on bulletproof vests, planned for every possible outcome. Caracas carried on outside, unaware that a war was about to break out that would change the city forever. At 10 that night, they loaded into 2 SUVs. Mariana sat beside Alejandro, her hand gripping his. Valentina sat behind them, checking her pistol for the 10th time. Remember, Alejandro told Mariana, you stay close to me. You don't run ahead. You don't talk. You do exactly what I say. Understood? Understood. They reached the port of La Guaira at 11:30. It was enormous. Dozens of docks, hundreds of containers, a maze of steel structures, and dark alleyways. The sea crashed against the concrete seawalls, the air thick with salt and diesel. Alejandro led his people to a small pier where 2 motorboats waited. They boarded silently, engines catching with a low purr, and cut along the coastline toward Dock 7. Mariana felt her heart pounding in her chest as she gripped her pistol, safety off, finger resting exactly where Valentina had taught her. Alejandro sat beside her, his face a mask of concentration. Dock 7 sat isolated at the far end of the port. As they approached, Mariana saw a large ship moored at the dock, men moving across its deck and along the pier. At least 20, exactly as Alejandro had said. But there was something else. A black limousine parked nearby, and beside it, a man in a white suit. Carlos Mendoza. Alejandro's jaw tightened. He's here, he murmured. That son of a bitch actually showed up. That's good, right? Mariana asked. Either I end him, or he ends me, Alejandro answered. Either way, this finishes tonight. The boats docked silently at a smaller pier below the main one. They moved without a sound, like shadows. Alejandro signaled with his hand, and his men fanned out, taking positions. Mariana walked beside Alejandro, her breath shallow. She could hear the men on the dock laughing, talking, oblivious to the death closing in around them. Alejandro raised his hand, counting silently. 3, 2, 1. Chaos broke loose. The first shot tore through the night like thunder. One of Mendoza's guards dropped, hit in the head, and then everything exploded at once. Alejandro's men emerged from the shadows, firing with surgical precision. Mendoza's guards scrambled to return fire, caught off guard, disoriented. Alejandro ran toward the ship, Mariana right behind him. Bullets whistled around them, striking metal and concrete. Mariana fired for the first time. One of the men charging toward them took a hit in the leg and dropped, screaming. Good shot, Alejandro shouted, not slowing down. They reached the ship. On deck, another battle raged, Alejandro's men against the crew. Miguel fired with a pistol in each hand like something out of an action film. Valentina moved like a dancer of death, fluid and lethal. And then Mariana saw him. Carlos Mendoza stood beside the limousine, watching the battle unfold with an unsettling calm. He was handsome in a cold, cruel way, cleanly shaved, hair slicked back, his white suit immaculate. But his eyes were reptilian, and they were fixed directly on Mariana. He smiled. Alejandro, Mendoza shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. I see you brought your girl. How sweet. Alejandro froze. He turned, his gaze locking on Mendoza. For a second, the world stopped. And then Mendoza raised his weapon, aiming straight at Mariana. Alejandro moved faster than Mariana had ever seen a man move. He threw himself at her, knocking her to the ground the same instant Mendoza pulled the trigger. The bullet passed through the space where her head had been a moment before, but Alejandro didn't have time to get back up. Mendoza was already running toward them, his men forming a shield around him. Mariana raised her gun. Her hands were shaking, but her target was clear. She fired, once, twice, 3 times. One of Mendoza's men dropped. Then another. Mendoza stopped short, his eyes widening in surprise. The bitch is shooting, he shouted. But there was something new in his voice now. Fear. Alejandro got to his feet, weapon already raised, and traded fire with Mendoza's remaining men. Bodies fell on both sides. But Mendoza was cunning. He retreated to the limousine, using it as cover, and before anyone could stop him, he climbed in and the car peeled away with a screech of tires. No, Alejandro roared, chasing the car, firing. But the limousine was armored. The bullets bounced off harmlessly. Mendoza escaped. But the battle was won. Mendoza's men were dead or fleeing. The ship belonged to Alejandro now. $20 million in cocaine his. Miguel appeared beside Alejandro, bleeding from an arm wound, but grinning. We got it, he said. The whole shipment. Alejandro didn't look satisfied. He was staring in the direction the limousine had disappeared. He's still alive, he said quietly. That means this isn't over. Mariana came to his side, touching his shoulder. But we won this battle, she said. That counts for something. Alejandro looked at her, and in his eyes was a mix of pride and fear. You were incredible, he said. I saved your life. I told you, Mariana said, smiling despite the shaking in her legs. Together, we're unbeatable. But as they made their way back to the trucks with their prize, Mariana knew Alejandro was right. This wasn't over. Mendoza was still out there, and now he was more dangerous than ever. The war had only just begun. Caracas never looked more beautiful than at dawn after a storm. Mariana stood on the balcony of Alejandro's penthouse in Altamira, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the city gold and pink. 3 days had passed since the battle at the port, and the tension in the air was almost tangible. Mendoza had vanished. No counterattack, no retaliation, only silence. And that silence was more terrifying than any assault could have been. Alejandro joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His warmth was a comfort, but Mariana could feel the tension coiled through his body. You're not sleeping, she said quietly. I can't, he answered, pressing a kiss to her neck. Something's coming. I can feel it. Mariana turned in his arms to face him. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, jaw set tight. The war with Mendoza was wearing him down. Maybe we should run, she whispered. Take the money from the port and just disappear. You, me, Sofia. Far from Venezuela. Alejandro smiled sadly. brushing a hand along her cheek. I wish it were that simple. But Mendoza would never let us go. He'd hunt us to the end of the earth. The only way to end this is to kill him. Then why haven't you? Mariana asked. Do you know where he's hiding? Miguel found his hideout yesterday. Because I want him to come to me, Alejandro said. I want it to be his decision. His last one. Mariana was about to ask what he meant when Alejandro's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face hardened instantly. What happened? Mariana asked, fear tightening in her stomach. Alejandro showed her the phone. A message from an unknown number. Just a photo. Sophia. Mariana felt the world stop around her. In the photo, Sophia sat bound to a chair, blindfolded. Behind her stood a masked man, a gun pressed to her head. No, Mariana whispered, her legs giving out. Alejandro caught her before she fell. The phone buzzed again. A text message. Want your little girl back, Sandoval? Come alone. The old warehouse in Quirilla. Midnight. Bring anyone with you, and she dies. Alejandro read the message in silence, his jaw trembling with barely contained fury. For a moment, Mariana thought whatever was building in his chest might explode and take everything around him with it. But instead, he took a breath and looked at Mariana. Call Miguel, Valentina, everyone. We have 6 hours to plan. But he said to come alone, Mariana said, her voice trembling. And I will, Alejandro said coldly. But only a fool actually goes alone. Mendoza is expecting that. So we're going to be smart about it. The next 6 hours were a blur of frantic activity. The penthouse turned into a command center. Miguel arrived with maps of Quirilla, the poorest and most dangerous neighborhood in Caracas, ruled by gangs, a place the police rarely dared enter. Valentina brought weapons, heavy rifles, grenades, knives. Alejandro's 10 best men gathered, each of them ready to die for their boss. Mariana sat in the corner, watching them plan, her thoughts somewhere else entirely. Sophia, her best friend since childhood, a girl who had never hurt anyone, who knew nothing about her father's world, was now a hostage because of Mariana, because of her and Alejandro. The guilt was overwhelming. This is my fault, she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. If we hadn't. Alejandro was beside her instantly, kneeling in front of her, taking her face in his hands. No, he said firmly. This is not your fault. This is Mendoza's fault. His alone. And I will kill him for what he's done. And if he hurts her, Mariana sobbed. If it's already too late. It's not too late, Alejandro said, though Mariana could see the same fear in his own eyes. I'll get her back. I promise you. By 8 that night, the plan was set. Alejandro would go into the warehouse alone, as Mendoza demanded. But Miguel, Valentina, and the rest would be positioned around the building, on rooftops, in alleys, ready to move the moment the opportunity came. Mariana wanted to go, but Alejandro refused outright. No, he said. I'm not risking losing you and Sophia in the same night. But, no, Mariana. His voice was unbending. You stay here, with 2 guards. Locked in. Safe. This isn't up for discussion. Mariana knew there was no point fighting him when he used that tone. There was no negotiating with it. At 10 o'clock, Alejandro began to prepare. He dressed entirely in black. Jeans, shirt, jacket, a bulletproof vest underneath, 2 pistols, one at his waist and one strapped to his ankle, a knife tucked into his boot. Mariana watched him, feeling her heart splinter apart piece by piece. This could be the last time she ever saw him. The last time she ever touched him. When he finished dressing, he came to her. He didn't speak, only looked into her eyes, studying every detail of her face as if trying to memorize it. Come back to me, Mariana whispered. Both of you, come back to me. We will, Alejandro said. He kissed her, long and deep and desperate, his hands holding her as if he never wanted to let go. But finally, he had to. He pulled back, his fingers slowly untangling from hers. I love you, he said. Whatever happens tonight, you need to know that. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. I love you too, Mariana answered, tears falling freely now. Now come back to me, Alejandro. Please. Alejandro nodded, and then he was gone. Mariana collapsed onto the sofa, her body shaking with sobs. One of the guards, a young man named Carlos, brought her a glass of water. He'll come back, he said quietly. The boss always comes back. But Mariana knew that was a lie. In Alejandro's world, no one had guarantees. Death could come for anyone, at any moment. The hours crawled by like an eternity. Mariana paced the penthouse, unable to sit still. Carlos and the other guard, Roberto, tried to calm her, but nothing worked. At 11:30, her phone buzzed. A message from Miguel: "We're in position. Alejandro's going in, 5 minutes." Mariana gripped the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. Cadilla at night was a maze of shadows and danger. The old warehouse Mendoza had named had stood abandoned for years. Concrete covered in graffiti, windows shattered, doors hanging off their hinges. The perfect place for a trap. Alejandro stopped his car 100 meters from the building and continued on foot. He knew his people were already in position. Miguel on the rooftop across the street, Valentina in the alley to the right, the rest scattered strategically around the perimeter. But he also knew this would be dangerous. Mendoza wasn't a fool. He entered through the main door. Inside, the warehouse was dark, lit only by a few portable lamps set around the center of the room. And there, tied to a chair, was Sofia. Alejandro's heart clenched. His daughter, his little girl. Her face was streaked with tears, her hair a mess, but she was alive, breathing. "Papa!" Sofia cried when she saw him. "Papa, please, help me." Alejandro stepped forward, but stopped at the sound of slow applause behind him. "How touching," Carlos Mendoza said, stepping out of the shadows. He still wore his white suit, though it was dirty now, stained. A pistol sat in his hand. The great Alejandro Sandoval, brought to his knees by a little girl. "Let her go," Alejandro said, his voice calm but lethal. "Your problem is with me, not with her." Mendoza smiled wide. "Ah, but you see, she's the best way to hurt you. Just like that little friend of yours. Mariana, was it? Sweet girl. Maybe when I'm done with you, I'll pay her a visit." Alejandro's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. "Touch her, and I'll kill you so slowly you'll beg for death." "Big words for a dead man," Mendoza said, raising the pistol, aiming it at Alejandro. "Any last words?" But before he could pull the trigger, the windows exploded. Miguel and Valentina burst in, firing. Mendoza's men, hidden in the shadows, returned fire. The warehouse became a war zone in seconds. Alejandro dove for Sofia, shielding her with his body as bullets tore through the air above them, striking walls and floor. "Papa, what's happening?" Sofia screamed, her voice raw with panic. "It's going to be okay," Alejandro said, cutting her ropes free with a knife. "Just stay close to me." He pulled her up and ran for the exit, but Mendoza stood blocking the way, his gun raised, aimed at Alejandro, his finger tightening on the trigger. And then the world slowed. A gunshot tore through the air, but it wasn't Alejandro who fell. It was Mendoza, clutching his shoulder, blood pouring between his fingers. Alejandro spun around and saw the impossible. Mariana, standing in the warehouse doorway, gun raised, her face set with determination. Carlos and Roberto stood just behind her, weapons drawn too. "No," Alejandro shouted. "What are you doing here?" "Saving you," Mariana said, stepping inside. "Did you really think I'd let you go alone?" Mendoza laughed despite the pain. "How sweet," he shouted. "All together. Makes it so much easier to kill you all at once." He raised his gun with his left hand, aiming at Mariana. But Alejandro was faster. One shot, clean, lethal. The bullet caught Mendoza directly between the eyes. Carlos Mendoza dropped to the ground, dead before he hit the concrete. Silence. Mendoza's remaining men, seeing their boss dead, began to flee. Miguel and Valentina chased after them, though most vanished into the night. Alejandro stood frozen, staring at Mendoza's body. For years this man had been his enemy, his nightmare, and now he was nothing but a corpse on a concrete floor. Sofia slipped out of her father's arms and ran to Mariana, throwing herself into her embrace. "Mariana, I was so scared." Mariana held her tight, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry this happened." Alejandro crossed to them, wrapping his arms around both women, his daughter, and the woman he loved. They stood there for a long moment, 3 people bound together by pain, love, and survival. "Let's go home," Alejandro said quietly. But Mariana knew there was still one reckoning left to face. The next day, Alejandro gathered Sofia in the penthouse living room. Mariana sat beside him, holding his hand. What was coming was unavoidable. Sofia looked between them, puzzled. What's going on? Why do you both look so serious? Alejandro took a deep breath. Sofia, I have to tell you something. Something that should have been said a long time ago. Okay, Sofia said slowly, her eyes flicking between her father and Mariana. Mariana and I are together, Alejandro said. We love each other. And I know this is complicated. Wait. Sofia cut in, her eyes widening. She looked at Mariana. You and my father. Mariana nodded, unable to meet her friend's eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know it's crazy. I know I'm your best friend, and I should have told you sooner. How long? Sofia asked, her voice strangely calm. Alejandro and Mariana exchanged a glance. 3 months, Alejandro answered. Sofia sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she began to laugh. I knew it, she said, staring at them in disbelief. God, I knew something was going on. The way you two looked at each other. The way Dad started smiling more. The way you, Mariana, always blushed when he was around. Mariana and Alejandro stared at her in shock. You're not angry? Mariana asked. Sofia shrugged. You want the truth? It's weird. It's really weird. My best friend, sleeping with my father. She looked at Alejandro, and her eyes softened. But I've never seen you happy, Dad. Not since Mom died. You were alone. Empty. But with Mariana, you're alive. And that's what matters. Alejandro stood and pulled his daughter into a tight embrace. I love you, he said. You're the most important person in my life. I know, Sofia answered, smiling through tears. And that doesn't change just because you love Mariana too. Mariana joined them, and the three of them stood together. A family, bound in the most unexpected way. A week later, Caracas slowly returned to something like normal. With Mendoza dead, the war was over. Alejandro took control of the northern neighborhoods, consolidating his power. But something in him had changed. The violence that had defined his life for years no longer held any pull for him. One afternoon, he took Mariana to a special place, a small house in the hills above Caracas, overlooking the entire city. The house was simple but beautiful, surrounded by tropical plants and flowers. What is this? Mariana asked as they stepped out of the car. Our house, Alejandro said. If you want it. Mariana looked at him, her heart racing. What do you mean? Alejandro took her hand, leading her to the front of the house. Caracas stretched out below them, millions of lights flickering in the night like stars fallen to earth. I'm done with this life, he said. I'm handing the business to Miguel. He'll be the new boss. I want something different. I want a life with you. Tears rose in Mariana's eyes. Alejandro got down on one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside sat a simple, elegant ring, a diamond catching the moonlight. I know it's crazy, he said. I know we've only known each other a few months. But I can't imagine life without you. Will you marry me, Mariana? She looked at this powerful, dangerous man kneeling before her, completely undone, and she knew there was only one answer. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Alejandro rose, slid the ring onto her finger, and kissed her. That night, in the little house on the hill, they gave themselves to each other one last time as an unmarried couple, and for the first time as something more. There was tenderness in it, and promise, and a kind of peace neither of them had known they were capable of. 3 months later, they stood before a small gathering of guests in the garden of their new home. Sofia was Mariana's maid of honor. Miguel stood as Alejandro's best man. Valentina cried, the woman hard as nails, undone by the sight of it. When Alejandro kissed his bride for the first time, Caracas glowed behind them under the afternoon sun. The same city that had seen so much violence, so much pain, now bearing witness to love instead. I love you, Mrs. Sandoval, Alejandro whispered. I love you, Mr. Sandoval, Mariana answered, smiling through her tears. A year later, Mariana gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Diego. Alejandro held him in his arms, staring down at the tiny face, and Mariana saw tears in his eyes. I swear to you, he whispered to the baby, I'll give you the life I never had. A life without violence, without fear, just love. And he kept his promise. Alejandro Sandoval, once the most feared man in Caracas, became a devoted husband and father. The empire, the violence, all of it belonged to the past now. He was simply a man who loved his family. Sofia graduated from medical school and became a doctor, working in the poorest neighborhoods of Caracas, helping the people who needed it most. She visited often, playing with little Diego, savoring the family they had built together. Miguel ran the business with fairness and wisdom, steering it gradually away from its most brutal edges. Caracas would never be free of violence entirely, but under his leadership, it was safer than it had been in years. Valentina became Diego's bodyguard, a proud aunt who would teach him everything she knew when he was old enough. And Mariana found something she never thought possible: real love. Deep, transformative love. A love that began as forbidden, that should have been impossible, but that survived everything thrown at it. One evening, with Diego asleep, Mariana and Alejandro sat together on the balcony, looking out over Caracas. He held her close, and she rested her head against his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "All of it. The chaos, the violence, the risk." Mariana turned to look at him, smiling. "Not for a single second," she said, "because it led me to you. And you're worth every risk." Alejandro kissed her, slow and tender, with a love that would never end. "I love you," he whispered. "Today, tomorrow, always." "Always," Mariana echoed. And as Caracas glittered below them, two souls who had found each other in the darkness held on tight, knowing their love was strong enough to survive anything. It was a forbidden love that became the greatest gift either of them had ever received, a story that began in danger and ended in hope. And they lived happily, not in a fairy tale, but in reality. An imperfect, beautiful, true reality. The end.